You just described wisdom. Wisdom is the ability to put off my immediate gratification of what I need for something in the future. And so I've got to be aiming at something that's bigger than me so that I can see what's when my needs are jeopardizing the fulfillment of something that's bigger than me, that has meaning, that transcends my own desires.
Let's impact some today. I think we're gonna do a great job. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Modern Man Podcast, where we are here to connect men in pursuit of their potential. I encourage you to join us as we embrace discomfort, cultivate community, and put wind in each other's sails. Now, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. And don't forget to share this with somebody that you also know can get value from it as well. Now, to the fellas that are listening, I'm going to talk to you really quick. I encourage you, join the Noble Knights men's group. If you're serious about your growth, there you can find the support, the accountability, and the mentorship you need to achieve your goals. Fellas, it's time to get serious. Join us and become a part of a community of like-minded men on a mission to improve their capacity for life and put wind in each other's sails. And I'm excited because we're getting wind in our sails today from my guest, who is a distinguished entrepreneur, executive coach, and transformational leader with over 4 decades of experience in organizational development. As the co-founder and senior partner at Take New Ground, he has pioneered initiative approaches to team dynamics and leadership training, emphasizing authentic engagement and candid feedback. It is a pleasure to have Dan Tocchini on the podcast. Dan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Ted, honored. Really great to be here. I was looking forward to this from our prep call. Really enjoyed having a conversation with you and looking forward to this. So thanks for having me.
Likewise, and it's an absolute honor, and I want to step out of the way, as I often do at the beginning of the episode, because we have such amazing guests on the show, and you're definitely amongst some of the most revered of them. So I'd love for you really quick to speak to the audience, right? The podcast is yours. Let them know who you are, what you do, how we got here today, a little bit of your story, and then we could jump into our conversation.
Well, I see myself as a catalyst. Basically, people hire me to catalyze change or transformation, either in their personal lives or in their organizations and their families. I've been doing it for 45 years, and it stems out of my own background. I came out of a Italian American family, pretty middle class. And when my youngest brother was born, my mother had a schizophrenic break. Basically started hearing sounds and manic depressive and went catatonic. It was really traumatic. I was about 12 years old, and I remember it was extremely impactful for me. And from that moment on, I really was seeking how to get to her as a young kid and
Mm,
catalyze our relationship because it's like losing your mother. It was almost like she died, and here's another woman. And finding her in that process was it was a process of catalyzing a number of different things, but right down to my father had been inviting psychiatrists from all over the world, and they weren't it wasn't working. And the doctors were talking about giving her a lobotomy in those days. Back in the 60s, they did lobotomies. They did, cut your brain and make you basically passive. And I begged
uh,
him, because I looked into it, begged him not to do it and give me a chance. And he did, and I was able to meet with her. I was a big kid in kindergarten. I was 5'7" or 5'8", something like that. So I was a
what?
tall kid. Yeah. I was supposed Doctor kept saying I was gonna be 6'8", and I grew to 6'2". I think I grew this way, play ball. But it was really, that was a big event in my life. And I learned how to connect with her, became the go-between between her often, my father and the psychiatrist. And I would debrief in different places like Esalen or in Mill Valley. I was in Northern California. And so I took a deep interest at an early age in human development, my own development and my mother's. and needless to say, it was pretty traumatic. And when I got kind of getting out of high school, playing ball, I went through a pretty traumatic time. My grandfather died. My parents split up when I was about 17, so it was pretty crazy. I was
Yeah.
playing ball, and I ended up leaving home. I left home early and went to school, and then broke my foot and split, and then got deep into drug addiction. I got into a cocaine addiction, and
Oh man.
met my wife while I was doing it, living a double life. And she basically, you know, called me out at some point, and that was a catalyst in my life because at that point I was married 5 years. We'd been together 10, and I had a baby boy who was just only a year old. And basically getting my, making that turnaround was everything. I never thought, I thought I was a fraud. I never thought that I could ever, here I was dealing drugs and masking it the best I could. And now, my wife wants me to be legit. And I came up against a lot of self doubt and shame. And well, the good news was I'd done a lot of reading and I'd done a lot of
Yeah.
research, and I knew there was other things that were possible. So, uh, and my wife is a sweetheart. I mean, she loved me through it, and she's also a soldier, tough as nails. And
Yeah.
together we were able to fight through this thing. And I went to work. It was interesting because all the background I have of my mother came to fruition when my father had done a public training, a transformational training. It was called LifeSpring. There's a lot of them out there, like the forum and so on. And
Yep.
he came to me, and I had, I was in the middle of recovering, and he came to me and said, "Hey, look, man, you got to go to work. You got to go do this. You're going to end up working there." And my father and I were estranged at the time, so this was a reconciliation between us. And then
Hmm.
I took his coaching. After it took me about a year, and I went and did it, and I knew immediately this was what I wanted to do. I was in my 20s. I think I was 23, and so I jumped on board really quick. Tell me.
You mentioned the catalyst working first with your mom, and then it all coming back in adult age. For
Yeah.
anybody listening, what would you describe as a catalyst that someone might be looking for in their lives themselves? Maybe they're looking to catalyze themselves. What would you describe as the catalyst and what it actually does for people?
A catalyst is, if you take it in chemistry, it increases the chemical reaction.
Mhm.
It causes multiple things to come together without changing itself. It catalyzes, and in business or leadership, it's someone it could be a person, an event, something happening that catalyzes a team or catalyzes an individual to break through their previous history and do something unprecedented. Like, just
Mm,
take a leap, like, do something that, you look in their history, it was never there. In my history, it wasn't there. You know, basically, I came from a broken home, and and being able to connect to that and get authentic about it with the help of my wife, um, it catalyzed me to become, to go after what I really longed for. I lost the family when my mom got sick, and then 6 years later, they got divorced. This is like dissolved over the 6 years, and that was a deep getting authentic about that wound was part of my recovery coming out of the drugs. And then
yeah.
acknowledging it as something that was vitally important to me. Um, Catalyzed my life. All of a sudden, in a very short period of time, I went from lying, cheating, dealing drugs, etc., to coming home at night, working with my wife and child now, and then I had a second child, and basically developing my 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 career. I started working
Yeah.
with the transformational training company, and I had gone through multiple different things when I was in high school and with my mother. So I was familiar with that kind of work, and it was beneficial to me then and helped me. catalyzed my life after that. And then, and I've always been the guy to step on the elephant in the room. My dad would say, if there's something that you shouldn't say, Dan's going to say it. And so
Yeah.
I learned to get a hold of that. I learned to get a hold of that and use it for the good of other people instead of just using it, if you will, to terrorize or offend or you know, in Italian we say vendetta, for
Yeah.
revenge, that kind of thing. And
Yeah.
of course it's still there. And my wife and I have been together for we've been together for 50 years. And we laugh at each other a lot now, whereas before we might have gotten offended. We're very well familiar. We're very familiar with those dark aspects of our personality. And so when they come up, we can navigate them with some humor and some connection. And we don't go, we stop before we're doing damage. It's like, oh, wait,
Yeah.
look what you're doing. Right. And that comes from years of standing with each other and putting words on aspects of life where prior to that time we would get, at least I would get aggressive or shut down. Those are
Yeah.
kind of the two things men tend to do. I can either get aggressive and attack or just shut down and stonewall. And being able to
Yeah.
break that
Disconnect.
up, right? You know what I mean? Being able to put words on that, being able to connect in the disconnection of our relationship was a huge breakthrough for us. And
Yeah.
we've had multiple times where we've done that, where we've navigated that. We have little frameworks that we apply both in, personally, and then with the other. The key
Yeah.
is if you don't learn to manage yourself, you can never lead others. And that was the
Mm.
first step in my marriage, was managing myself so I could lead my family.
I
Big
love
deal.
that because I mentioned catalyst because, as you also explained, certain events in life that could be traumatic. And for a lot of us and the listeners at home, their trauma is a catalyst in a
Right
different
on.
direction. It's a
Right on.
catalyst that changed them in a way that they never signed up for. And then we find ourselves years down the line into an area of life living this reality that we never asked for. And so many people ask for a change. And we've heard the saying, if you don't change what you do, you'll get what you always gotten, right? And it takes doing something different to get something different. And oftentimes it's introducing ourselves into a new catalyst or seeking out that catalyst. Spoiler alert,
Right
everybody
on.
listening, you have one right here as a guest, but you find that catalyst and then you voluntarily lean into it. So you mentioned that transformational work that you started. And I want to back up because I don't want to just breeze over the fact that you mentioned the dealing with drugs and the double life. How how do you turn away from that? Because I imagine there's a lot of guys who can
That's a
listen
great question.
who we hold on to shame. We look at the things we might have done in the past and we haven't forgiven ourselves and we don't know how to let go of that identity and move forward to be the wholesome husband that you became, right? Coming home, spending time with your then two kids. So talk about that double life and how you were able to catalyze yourself out of that. I would love for you to share that with the audience.
Sure. Look, what I have to say is probably countercultural in the
Sure.
world. Um, but for me, in the work I've done with myself, and I've done a lot of work in the streets with kids coming out of gangs, multiple generations, created curriculum, worked with them. I relate to that whole world and how I came out of it, and how I've worked with people, and how I work with people in our trainings, both our leadership trainings and anything else that we're doing, is the way somebody changes. So there's plenty of research on this. People are 5 times more likely to change or transform because they want to avoid suffering. More
Mm,
than 5 times more than they would going after something they would like to have. So it's great. So I'll give you an example. If I go work with, I remember how I felt, but and I can relate to this when I work with kids in prison, coming out of prison wanting to re-enter. I've been there where you say to them, "What do you want to do?" And nobody. First off, when you're in that place, you don't want to think about what you most want because you don't think you can have it. And so if you ask some kid in prison, what's their biggest dream? Well, he's going to say, get out of prison. But if you start talking to them about, well, that's no dream, that's not a vision. As soon as you get out, then what? You're going to come back. That's why there's an 87% recidivism rate, people coming back to prison. And when you go back to prison, you don't want to be telling people what you care about because they'll use it on you. So that's a double bind. And so to be able to get somebody to talk about it, that's how I felt. The good news about being in prison is you're in prison. But when you're not
Yeah.
in behind bars, you're still you can I was in prison because I had created a false self that my wife, I thought, oh, my wife likes that person, but I'm not really that person. What's she going to do when she finds out that this is the person inhabiting this body? You know, is she going to want to stay? And the first thing I had to get was, you know what? If I want to really have that relationship, I got to be willing to lose it. And I remember thinking to one of the things I learned at a young age, I was told at a young age, I didn't learn till I was later. But my grandfather
Mhm.
used to say, what you don't face now will eventually defeat you.
Mm.
That's a big deal, man. And that used to ring in my ears. Like the more every time I lied to her, I was running away from what I was being called to face by God, I believe. Like, you need to face this. You got to face your double life. You got to face the lies you've been living. And if you don't, they will defeat you and your family. And I saw it happen to my dad. So, and my mom. So I was, this was so the more you get a hold of that and the more that weighed on me, the more motivated I was. Geez, I might as well face the short-term pain for the long-term gain. Even if she left, we would still have a better relationship separated than we had at the time together. And if I was honest and truthful, etc. That's one of the major principles that I utilize when I work with people. And Jung talks about shadow work, right?
Yeah.
Where you face your shadow, you face those things you actually hold against yourself, and that you think others will hold against you, in a way that you become familiar with them. Modern psychology. This is what I meant by the culture. Is wrapped up a lot of times. A large part of modern psychology is about getting rid of those aspects of your life that are dark. You can't do that. They're there. And the more you resist them, the more they persist. So the idea is to
Mm.
hug the cactus, which is a desert father's principle where you press into the things you that convict you about you, that you've used to condemn yourself with. Instead, get to know them, because they can be transformed. They don't. So this is the difference between change and transformation. Change is, well, we're going to get rid of that so we can change. Transformation is, I'm going to come to terms with that. I'm going to get to be friends with that so that it becomes a ally. When I see myself lying or cheating or, doing something that I don't like about myself, it's probably telling me something about how I'm relating to what's going on in that moment. I'm probably insecure
Mm.
or feel like a fraud and want to run away from it, and so what I tend to do would be get arrogant, bluster up, lie, maybe exaggerate, and if I catch myself doing that, then I can get authentic, and then the person that's there is who's it keeps I'm there staying connected instead of putting a front up, and so
Yeah.
being aware of those fronts, of those rackets, if you will, enables me to be more authentic. In other words, it's like
Mhm.
Soren Kierkegaard said, the most if you ask somebody what's authenticity, and Kierkegaard said, the most authentic a human being can become is to be authentic about their own inauthenticity. Because the minute I tell you that I'm inauthentic, I'm now being authentic
Yep.
because I'm letting you
That's so
know
true.
about what's so about me. And I, there's, I think we all have. a life lie, and what the life lie is, the lie we tell ourselves and believe about ourselves, then go about trying to disprove it. Like if
Yep.
I say my life lie is like I'm a fraud. So now instead of being authentic with you, I'm going to if I believe that lie, I'm going to do everything I can to prove to you that I'm not a fraud. And
Mhm.
I've done that, and then you get to know a version of me that isn't authentic. It's just parts, but there's a whole bunch
Yeah.
I'm omitting and don't want you near. And that's what I think breaks down a lot of relationship between men is we're
Yeah.
posturing and putting on a mask or a facade, that kind of thing.
If iron sharpens iron, so does one man sharpen another. But if you're a man and you're alone or listening to this, then who sharpens you? What's going on, guys? Ted Phaeton here, host of the Modern Man Podcast, also founder of the Noble Knights Mastermind Group. And I'm just out here encouraging you to find your circle. Maybe you're on a personal growth journey and nobody around you understands the new mentality that you're possessing. That's okay. You can find an online community that will pour into you, will navigate your goals and navigate your obstacles, share their experiences, resources, and more. Join the Noble Knights Mastermind Group and try us out for free to tap into a community of men helping each other scale up and reach their goals.
Check out themodernmanpodcast.com. We end up playing this character. We become who we think that the people around us would accept. And because of that, we get really good at playing this role. We should get an Oscar in it, but the problem is there is no Oscars for being fake. You just have that inauthenticity. And then, as you mentioned, I wrote it, prison without bars. You are
Oh,
stuck being this person that you don't even like.
amen. I mean, it's so true, man.
So you mentioned authenticity, and I want to tie that into leadership. And a study published in the Journal of Business Ethics, this is from 2010, found that authentic leadership positively influences team performance by fostering trust and open communication. And
Yeah,
you mentioned the moment I tell you I'm inauthentic, I'm being authentic because I'm
I'm
truthful
starting,
about my
and
inauthenticity.
yeah, that there's some finesse in there because most, just to be authentic is to be willing to stand with your team with them. To, not just you don't throw people under the bus. You own it. You own how you can. There's a number of different. There's a framework I have that I utilize when I'm working with people, and that is that look, you and I, if we're going to do something together, we're going to run into difficult times, right? Because the minute you and I get committed to something, everything that could stop that commitment becomes visible, right?
Yeah.
So the minute I said I was going to marry my wife, everything that was busting up the marriage became visible. And then I have to decide along the way, which am I going to face this and when am I going to face it? Because the longer I don't face it, the bigger the prices. So that creates an urgency. And then to face it, I've got to have a, like, how do you got to find words. You got to be able to put words on what it is that you want to talk about. And I've found that a lot of people, men and women, often have a hard time finding words for what they're experiencing, and it gets frustrating. And they'll get frustrated, angry, shut down because they externalize the experience. If you, Ted, didn't ask me that question, I wouldn't be upset. The minute I do that, I'm helpless because
Ah,
you have the power and you have to change for me to regain my presence. But if I say to myself, you say something, I get mad, I go, I wonder what I made up about what Ted said that upset me. Because I make the principle is the meaning of any communications in the listener. So if I'm
mm,
upset, if I'm triggered by what you say, if I'm offended, anything like that, there's something in what I'm telling myself about what you said that has caused me to react or pull back, to resist, to fight, flight, follow, fool, or freeze, to go into survival. The minute that happens, I withdraw my presence and now I'm on defense. And that produces a
mm.
whole different reality. often it produces the very reality we say we don't want. And then we say, well, see, that's just the way that it is, you know. But I don't, because I'm not willing to own my contribution to catalyzing it the way that it is for me, right? There's a,
Yeah.
and I'll never forget. At one point, about 14 years ago, my wife didn't. I could tell she wasn't doing well. She kept missing appointments with me because we do things to stay connected. And I kept asking her, do you want to, is there something wrong? She'd say no. And so then, this after a week. So the next week I started listing the things she would miss. So I sat down and said, look, I'm not here to make you wrong about them. I just want to understand, is there something you want to tell me? Do you not want to be with me? What's up? And she had come out and said, I think I need some time alone. I didn't really think about this. Last thing you want to hear. But
Yeah.
and I said, well, is there some other guy? And she said, no. We have a have had a very straightforward relationship. I believed her. She goes, I don't know what it is, Dan, but I think I feel like a tag along with you. I wonder if I married you because I loved you or because I felt guilty or, about you're the first guy I had sex with. And then we broke up and she went out with other men. There's a lot of things that went on. I said, well, that doesn't make sense, but I can see you're not well.
Yeah.
And what was interesting was as we talked, we realized we were connecting in the disconnection, even though the connection didn't feel good for me or for her.
Mm.
It enabled us to move authentically from there. And I moved up with my son. And I said, look, what do you need to do? And she goes, I don't know. I said, I told her, I said, look, whatever you need to do, I'm here for you. And so if you need, I just want to know if you're going to date somebody, let me know. That's one thing I need to know. She goes, that's not even in my head, Dan. I said, okay, but if it does, no problem. And I'm going to go live with Danny till you get clear. And because I felt like if I stuck around, she'd lose respect for me. Like,
Oh, no.
because I could
Yeah.
tell she didn't want to be with me, or she wanted to be with me at certain times, but she really needed time alone. And so she, we split up. I went up north, and about after a month, she called me one day and she asked me this funny question. She said, "How do you know that you love me and that that this is a relationship out of love, not out of codependence?" And I said to her, there's no doubt we've been codependent. Gee, many crickets. We've worked through multiple codependencies. We've talked about it. I was an addicted. You were a co. We went through this for years. So there's no doubt we have been codependent and probably still fight through some of that now. However, I know that there's love in this relationship. I've asked by the fruit, by our children, by our grandchild at the time. We had one grandchild, and we have six now. Seven coming, number
Nice.
seven's coming. Um,
Congrats.
and and I said, I know that, and the work that we've done around the country, around the world, has transformed lives, and the marriage work that we've done. I said, so honey, there's no doubt in my mind, and I want you to know, even if you don't get it, I'm going to love you. Even if you decide you're going to go out and you're going to go live a different life, and you're going to, even if you find another man, there'll be a place at my table, because look, man, I love you, and I can love you from afar or I can love you close up. Do I
Yeah.
want you to leave? No, part of me is I want to know where you stand as soon as I can, so I can, if you're leaving, I can mourn and
Mhm.
reinvent our relationship together. And so she got off the phone, and about 10 days later, I get a knock at the door, and she's there, and she's like, I know I love you. Apparently, she had to go. She was having memories of an abuse that had never come to her, and she had been abused by her brother, and it was
Oh.
coming to her memory. And she went and did this. It's a light therapy where they use this light, flashing light. It brings the trauma to the surface, and she had the full experience. It gives me goosebumps. And she said to me when she came home, she said, I asked her, I said, look, this is weird. What do you, I'm a little distrustful that you just show up?" And she said, "Let me tell you what happened." And so she told me that when she had this memory of her brother and what was going on, she realized it was able to separate a lot of the confusion and realized how I've supported her. And then she thought about, she said, Dan, if you would have been pressing on me and trying to, I told her at one point, all promises are off, except for our monogamy. Unless you want to do that, you got to let me know first.
Mhm.
But other than that, I don't want any heat on you. I'll take care of this. I'll send you all the assets. You decide what you want. If that's what you want. And she, I wanted her to get that I'm in. Whatever you're up to, I'm in. And
Yeah.
um, and she said, if you didn't stand with me so open-handedly, I probably would have made you the bad guy and not gotten to what I got to until after we divorced or whatever happened. And
Wow.
just your willingness to stand open-handedly. And she said, and this is what she said to me, "I respected you for that." And when I left, I knew that was what was up, man. If I stayed there and tried to make sure she didn't leave me or make sure she lived her promises as a wife, it would have
Yeah.
driven her away from me. And it's one of those,
That's amazing.
it's a paradox, right? It's like I did the exact opposite of what I normally do, which is hunt her down. In this case, it was, I could see this, I got to back off and let it be. And it was torture, man. I
Mhm.
lost 26 pounds in 2 weeks. Just,
Oh, man.
I
Just going through it.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
it was intense.
Going through it. Man,
Yeah.
Dan, that's such an amazing story, and thank you for your honesty, vulnerability, and authenticity in sharing that, because I could imagine some of the guys listening think to themselves, "I wouldn't be able to do that, man. Like, I wouldn't be able to do that," right? The thought of it
I
just
didn't think I
scares
could
them.
do
It
it
freaks them
either.
out. What what did the 4 decades of transformational leadership, coaching, and experiences teach you to prepare you for that moment? What would you credit to that moment for anybody listening who hopes they could tap into the same thing?
There's a couple things. Look, there's two types of knowledge. There's theoretical knowledge and there's practical knowledge, right? And
Mhm.
theoretical knowledge is really useful for getting things done, for producing things in the world. And practical knowledge is great for intrinsic value, right? So theoretical knowledge produces instrumental value, where your things are instruments and you get things done, and you can plow a field, you can work together as a partnership and do a good have business, etc. And my wife and I are business partners. We work well together that way. So instrumentally, theoretical knowledge works, but practical knowledge, and this is all Aristotle, but practical knowledge is it produces meaning. It produces value, intrinsic value. I value so one of the things I realized was for a long time in the first 10 years of my marriage, I realized all I knew about Eileen was what she did for me. One of the big breakthroughs in our relationship early in the relationship was how I used her and she used me. That's where that codependency was. And we went through multiple conversations and revelations and counseling, coaching. We belonged to a church, and we had a great pastor who worked into our lives. And I have friends who are, I grew up in Esalen and with therapists. So we had friends who would intervene and work with us, and we got familiar with that. So when this started to occur, at the first two about the first 10 days, I was angry because I wasn't getting what I should get based on her promises. I was in the complete right. Pla- I was in the right to ask and demand for it. But I saw that it was hurting her, and intrinsically, she means everything to me. And so I really remember laying in. What happened was I had this sciatica attack, right? And she was supposed to come to bed and watch this movie with me because I couldn't get out of bed. And I was laid up for weeks. And she didn't come to bed. And I got pissed off. she went in the bathroom and primped. So I took the bottle of water by the side of my bed and I threw it at the door to hit the door in the bathroom, but I hit my big screen TV and broke it. So she comes to bed to turns the TV on. What happened to the TV? I had to confess that. The next day, she said she'd come in. She was supposed to come watch. It was when Game of Thrones first came on. So and then the next day, she said, "I'll come back and watch that episode when you're on the couch." And in that afternoon. So because I go out in the afternoon and lay on the couch, I was really hurting, and she didn't make it for that either. So
Mm.
and then I broke the changer and I crushed it and oh shit, tried to stack it. Couldn't get out of the couch. She saw that. Then and then that afternoon she was taking me to the doctor for my back. I was getting into the car and I hurt my back and she made a smart ass remark. I got offended and flung my phone on the dashboard of the BMW and it splintered the windshield of my X5.
Um,
And then I looked at her and I realized, okay, and I had been thinking about this. Why am I so mad? One of the things I work with people on is noticing the conversation you're in, right? And so I was noticing my conversation was all about what I wasn't getting. And I was right because she made these promises. I should be mad. And then I realized when I saw her hurt for the way I reacted to her, and she was taking me to the hospital, she'd been taking really good care of me, even though she missed these agreements. I just stopped and I realized she needs something different than what I'm giving her. She needs a friend as much as I do. And I just looked at her and said,
mm.
all promises are off, honey. I love you. You, no pressure. And I just started writing on my phone and she said, what are you doing? And I go, I'm journaling my thoughts so I can see them. So I can see what I'm making up because what I'm making up is making you an enemy instead of the one I love more than anybody in the world. I don't need to do that. And you know what? I decided if I just release you from the promises, those expectations aren't there, and I can work through whatever the disappointment is with you, and we can get connected again. And she
Yeah.
wept. She got off it. And that was the start. That's when after some time of doing that, I realized I needed to move to California because it was too tempting, or not up to San Francisco from LA, because it was too tempting with my son to live up there rather than stay with her and work through, I'd be too tempted to try to get what I wanted and I needed to give her space. And
Yeah.
that worked out, but it's a deep process. So what I was doing was catching my thoughts and noticing my impact on her, and that managing the impact that I was having on her was more important than being right about what I was demanding from her. Because I
Yeah.
did it, I was right. That's where being wrong can still make a difference. Like if I would have just kept doing that, I wouldn't be with her now. I'm convinced. No
Yeah.
doubt.
You could be right and alone, or you could be wrong and together. And
Yeah, and
sometimes
I risked, but I had to risk being alone forever. I mean, I figured, look, even if she left, and this is a big part of what we do, prices and rewards, right?
mm,
Like, like there's like even if she left, and I did this, I gave her the space and she left, we would still have a better relationship than if I drove her away because I was too needy. It
yeah.
would still, she would at least respect me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I that would allow me to be close to her even if we weren't gonna be together.
What I'm hearing from you, Dan, and we got connected from a guest on the show. He's about 3 or 4 episodes prior to this one, Adrian Kaler, and he mentioned reality is our friend.
Yes.
And I love how in your description, for anybody that's listening intently, what you hear and what I'm hearing from you, Dan, is a very rapid focus on reality and what to do with what's in front of us. Right? A lot
Yeah.
of us, as you mentioned, you say, I want to write my thoughts down to see what I'm creating. Right? You're paying attention to the conversation you're having with yourself. You're identifying why you might be acting how you're acting. And then you look at what your partner needs, and you're very much embracing reality as it's happening. And you say, just like you mentioned, give me the data, give me what you're thinking so I can move accordingly, so I can do the right
Let me
things.
know where you really
How
are so I can be with
Yeah.
that because if we don't start with where we are, we'll never get to where we wanna go. If you start
Mm,
if you're in San Francisco, you think you're in LA and you're going to New York, you're never gonna get to New York. You gotta realize you're in San Francisco, not LA. And that happens relationally, and it's hard, man. It's a hard conversation. And
yeah,
it's look, I knew that if I didn't address this, if I avoided this, it would defeat me. I knew that that was another thing that was operating in my head, was like, look, if I keep if I avoid where she is, if I avoid just connecting with where she is, and by insisting and enforcing what I deserve based on her word, then that's gonna defeat me in the long run. There's no doubt that
yeah,
that was gonna occur. And Adrian, it's interesting, Adrian and I, we're partners, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's
Yeah,
how we linked up.
yeah, oh, that's good, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I
So,
love that guy.
speaking of being partners, and the work you do, dedicating over 20,000 hours to mentoring executives, um, what common challenges have you seen leaders face, right? Because what you just depicted, I could take that as for me, the way I view it is as a playbook of how we could lead in our marriage. And what I mean by that is the situational awareness to put your own needs on hold in order to better serve the environment and what it needs,
Yeah,
right?
so
That's how we could lead our marriage.
you just described wisdom.
Mm,
Wisdom is the ability to put off my immediate gratification of what I need for something in the future. And so I've got to be aiming at something that's bigger than me so that I can see when my needs are jeopardizing the fulfillment of something that's bigger than me, that has meaning, that transcends my own desires. Right.
yeah,
And I don't know how to say it any other way, but when you know, I wanted to have a family with her. That was more important to me than me being right and alone or getting my way. And, there's plenty of times when I've stood my ground, and certainly she's come to the table, but that's because she could trust and respect me because she knew that I wasn't just eventually people get hip to the selfishness, to the narcissism, and they're going to go. They leave, and then you begin to think it's other people. Oh, what's wrong with them? I've been so good to them, right? I mean, I could have said
hmm,
that about my wife. Hell, I kept my promises; she didn't keep hers. But the broken promise is a cry for help. That's what most people don't get. A broken
yeah,
promise is a cry for help. It's where the catalyst needs to go. That's where the catalyst that's the catalyzing event. When she broke a week's worth of promises, little ones that we usually keep, I knew something was up. Now, I was facing, do I want to disrupt the harmony or the lack of in this case the lack of conflict? Well, no, not really. She was taking care of me, because I was in bed with a bad back, but I could tell that this needed to be talked about. And
yeah,
I remember thinking to myself in bed, the last thing I need to do is go to California, Northern California from LA with a bad back and live with my son and, pack up and do, it's like, that's the last thing I wanted to do. However, weighing that against the potential future I could see coming, no problem, right?
yeah.
Most of us don't stop long enough to go, what's coming? If I continue this, what's coming down the pipe? What future am I going to inherit? And
Mm.
then that's why people get surprised. When somebody says, "Well, I didn't even see it coming," or "I did," I could have said, if I just ignored it, she might have left 6 months later, and I would have said, "I never saw it coming because I was so wrapped in my own world, and I
Yeah,
was blindsided."
and
Yeah,
thankfully, again, with the work you've done the transformation within yourself
yeah.
to have that leadership. One more study I want to bring in and a couple more questions. Research in
Go.
the Journal of Organizational Change Management indicated that transformational leadership is a critical driver of organizational innovation and adaptability. You are able to adapt to the situation at home, just like men listening hope to not only adapt at home, but at work in their professional lives. Touch on, as we have a few minutes left in the podcast, uh, the adaptability and how that transformational leadership can help handling those storms that are sure to come, because whether we're in a storm, just getting out of one, or heading into one, we do know that the storm is always going to come back. So I would love to prepare our listeners for that journey.
All right. Well, best thing to do is best way I could say this is notice what you complain about because
Mm,
that's the indicator of the next storm. You're complaining because something isn't the way you want it to be, and you don't think you can make it better, so you complain. And here's the question I would ask people to think about. You just take your complaint and write it down. Write down your complaint. Write it down as specific as just raw. Don't show it to anybody. Just write your complaint down. This person, that, this woman, this, this guy at work, this manager, this CFO, this accountant, whatever whoever you're complaining about, and it keeps coming up. Write that big complaint down, and then when you write down when you complain about that, when that comes up, how do you behave? Describe it. I get angry, I withdraw, I attack, whatever. I want to, I get frustrated, I can't be around this person. Whatever it is, write it down. I tell how many times I've told this person they need to be on time, blah 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 blah. That one, right? Write that down.
yeah.
So that's what you do. You attack them, you tell them they're wrong. Okay, good. Now, once you've written that down, you got a good. You've written down the complaint. You write down how you behave. Right under that, ask yourself, what do I get from behaving that way? What
Yeah.
is the payoff of behaving that? Now, most people are going to say, well, I don't get anything. No, you actually do. That's the story you tell yourself. You tell yourself you don't get anything so you can continue, but you're doing it. If you're doing it, you're getting something. If you do it over and over again, you must really like it. Like that.
That part. Yeah.
Yeah, that's if it's still there, because one thing you can do, you can get rid of it. Like, I could complain about my wife about blah, 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 but I could always get rid of it. I could say I'm leaving. I could always separate. I can always do something. So if I'm staying there, I'm getting something from the way that it is. Now, what most people don't realize is that a complaint is a frustrated request. What is the request you're not willing to make? What is the reality you're afraid to face that could come up if you made that request?
Mm,
That's how you start to break through that stuff. Is you get clear with yourself, and then you get clear with the worst scenario, and the more you look at the worst scenario you can imagine, and the more you think about how you would handle it, the more brave you'll get. You'll see more
yeah.
possibility. That's what a coach is good for, is that he can help you think in angles that normally you're not thinking. You're just looking at justifying or rationalizing or making yourself right, you know, be showing everybody how good you are, how smart you are, rather than, hey man, what is it? Like one of the best things in the world is when I love this. I talk to a leader, they'll say, I can't get along. This guy, he comes late all the time. It's like I've hired him 6 months ago. It's still like that. And I'd say to him, okay, good. So what do you think you're getting out of it? And they'll get so upset. And my point to them is, what if you're prostituting yourself because you're afraid to face the issue? What if that? Well, if I go talk to him about it, he's my best salesman. He might leave. Yeah, okay. Well, let's talk
Mhm.
about what you're getting if he stays. Right?
Yeah.
Well, other guys start to see that he can come in late. Pretty soon they start coming, they start building the parade of horribles that will then they'll start to get, oh man, I'm actually going down. This is going to get worse if I don't get this straight. Like,
Yeah.
if I don't handle that, it will eventually defeat me. And that's where you catalyze things. That's where things take a leap when you go into those areas. Now, you got to prepare yourself for it. I'm not saying go in there half ass. You got to sit down and think about it and go. I have a framework I take people through so that when they do go, they're grounded, they're prepared, they're ready to pay the price. but they're also trying to
Yeah.
create the greatest possibility for things to break through. So, you got to sit down and prepare that. So I'm not saying just go be cavalier and start shooting everybody up.
Just kick the door open and see what happens. No,
That's
don't do
right.
that. Don't do that. Dan, you mentioned a couple times the frameworks and some of the processes you take people through. I know you have an event coming up in June, the Revenant Process. While we come to the end of the podcast, I'd really quick love for you to talk about that, give your links on how people can connect with you, follow you, some of the amazing work you do, and check out that Revenant event happening in June. So please, I'd love for you to share those details.
June 19 through 22 is the Revenant Process. It's called the Revenant Process. It's a leadership training, deep, deep work. 4 days. You do nothing else but that for 4 days. It'll be here in Boise, Idaho. And you can find it on takenewground.com. And you can, if you just go to the menu on the top, it'll say public events. Just look down in there, you'll see the Revenant in there. And there's a whole page, videos, testimonies, some great testimonies, a description. You get a good taste of it. If you'd like more, you have questions, you want them answered, you can respond on the website. We'll get back to you right away. Um,
Yeah.
we've got a great team, and we it's a real intensive, so you want to be prepared for it. And we, like I said, we've surveyed over 2,000 people, and 93% of them put it in the top 3 events of their life. So
Yeah.
I'm
I've spoken to
it's
people
a
personally
blast.
who've gone through it. They've said, "Ted, you need to do it." So it's on my calendar, it's on my wish list and to-do list. So hoping to see you, if not in June, very soon. And I did mean to rhyme
Good,
right
brother.
there. Uh Dan, I have one last question. It's usually the heaviest, which is why I save it for last. If it's something we've covered already, feel free to revisit and expand more on that. But what is something you've seen or something that's happened to you that shapes the way you view the world as a man?
I would say the loss of my grandson is probably the
Mm,
most. The loss of my grandfather was the first time, was a devastating hit. The loss of my family, the loss of my grandfather, and then the loss of my grandson. And I believe that the loss of my grandfather, the loss of my family, prepared me to have a family, and that when my grandson died, um, I was able to. In that time, I think it bonded our family in ways that I wished we would have bonded as kids in my origin, in my family of origin, where we came together and we faced it and talked about it. We spent 2 months in the house, and nothing was too difficult to talk about. Everybody was welcome to bring whatever there was going on for them, and we mourned together. But the losses, I guess, the losses of my life have been the deepest suffering, but also brought forth the 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 gold. The character that, by facing into them, the wisdom that's come out of it has blessed multiple people in our circle, rather than our family scattering and siloing, which what usually happens, which often happens as a matter of survival. We it brings us together as a team, as a tribe, and we serve each other. My daughter has been such a minister to me and my son, my boy. To see the way he suffered through the loss of his son was profound. And to lose my grandson and then to see my son suffer, I don't think I've ever suffered like that ever. And the
dang.
connection, you can't take it from me.
Yeah.
You can take my house, you can take my position, you can take all my money, you can lock me up, but you can never take that. That's like, it's an identity that is always there for me. I I I will always,
Okay.
I know when I read, like, I don't know if you ever read Viktor Frankl, uh,
Yeah. Man's Search for Meaning.
Man's Meaning. That when I read about how he suffered, and how his family, the loss of his family, nothing but the love of his family carried him through it. That's the things in those losses. That's what I experienced too. When I read that book, it thumps that. It brings
Yeah.
that up.
Dan, thank you. You mentioned authenticity and you shared your true self. Your true inauthentic self is seen, loved, and appreciated. So I appreciate it. Distinguished entrepreneur, executive coach, transformational leader with over 4 decades of experience in organizational development, co-founder and senior partner at Take New Ground. Dan Tocchini, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast and sharing
Thank
your
you, Ted.
wisdom and insights with us today. It's
Thanks,
been an
Ted.
absolute honor.
Loved it.
And yeah, I'm gonna recap some of the gems you left along the way for our listeners. I always end with just a quick recap for anyone who's driving, cleaning, or maybe doing some errands while listening. We appreciate the time, and as always, we promise not to waste it. But the catalyst, right? What is bringing things together at an accelerated pace? That transition that you're looking for in your life. Oftentimes, trauma is the catalyst we did not ask for, and in order to turn back and reimagine ourselves, we need to introduce a new catalyst into our lives. If you can't manage yourself, how can you expect to lead or manage others? A lot of you listening to this podcast aspire to be leaders in your home, in your business, in your lives. If you don't manage self, how can you expect to manage others? The motivation for change. We are 5 times more likely to avoid suffering than to go after something that we want. Understand that motivation and tap into it. And what you don't face now will eventually defeat you. How many small problems are you ignoring? How many things should you address that you're just pushing off until tomorrow? It will be bigger and more daunting tomorrow, and you're not doing yourself any favors by kicking that can down the road.
Um,
The more you resist, the more it persists. It's going to keep nagging at you, and the tapping will get harder and more
Yes.
frequent as you continue to move forward. Come to terms with that and make it an ally. We're talking about your shadow, those
Rises.
dark sides. Don't avoid it. Don't run away from it. Lean into it. Stand in the storm,
Arn.
face that reality, make the appropriate decisions, lead with love, put off that self gratification. Because I also wrote down the vision is more important than self. And that is what we need to tap into. And notice what you complain about. That's the indicator of the next storm. So many good gems along the way. Dan Tocchini, guys, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, reach out to Dan, check out the Revenant Process. I might just see you there in June. But as always, I'm going to ask that you share this with a friend that you know can get value from it as well. Someone that needs to hear Dan's words or mine. And make sure that you hit that subscribe button to catch a new episode each and every single week. Leave us a rating to let us know how we're doing. It's the best compliment that you can give us. And as I always say at the end of the episode, guys, everybody wants the sunshine, but they don't want the rain. But you can't get the pleasure without first the pain. Let's grow.